Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Letterman. I work with Fish and Wildlife Outreach at Minnesota DNR, and I'm excited to be your host today. Today, we're talking about wildfire season and being prepared. It's already here. Spring is here, but it's also, of course, been a really dry year and winter, I guess, since last summer. So we're going into some time of the year where there's increased danger, and we're going to hear a lot today from some of our great staff in the forestry division about some of the work that they do and how we can all be prepared for this coming season. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and she'll talk to us about that topic. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here along with some of my colleagues, Travis Vertigan, who is our Predictive Services Coordinator, and Mike Palmer, one of our Regional Firewise Specialists. I'm Karen Harrison. I'm our Wildfire Prevention Specialist at the DNR. And today we'll be talking a little bit about how we kind of plan and prepare the things that we look at in order to look forward at the spring wildfire season, which is our largest wildfire season in Minnesota. And then give some tips and things to think about, ways that you can plan and prepare at home and through the spring season, no matter what you're doing. So today we're going to have Travis talk about our wildfire monitoring and preparation. I will go over wildfire prevention, and Mike will be sharing about the Minnesota Firewise program. It's important to know that what wildfire is. So it's an unexplained, uncontrolled fire spreading through vegetative fuels, at times involving structures. And unlike a structure fire, a wildfire is not contained, and it has the potential to move and have, kind of a lot of vegetative fuels that it can use to spread. And it involves a lot of different things in terms of behavior and how it acts once it's been started. Thinking about fire and how fire works, it's important to know that fire, whether it's a wildfire or any fire that we're talking about, there's three things that are needed for a fire to start: fuel, oxygen, and heat. So fuel in a wildfire in particular, we're thinking about vegetation on the ground, leaves, twigs, grasses, logs, brush, shrubs, those kinds of things. But there are a lot of other things that can also be fuel once a wildfire has started and is spreading. Oxygen is in the air, and then heat is the kind of spark, that heat source that gets a fire started. And we'll talk a little bit about how wildfires start, in particular what those heat sources are. Once a wildfire has started, the fire behavior triangle, I'm realizing I might have just shared the wrong presentation. I'm sorry, I might have to reshare that. So in a second here, I should have double checked. So when we're looking at a wildfire, the things that influence that are topography. So, hills, valleys, shoreline on the water, things like that, the weather, and then what the fuel is and the potential fuel that in its path. So let me see. I'm sorry, I'm going to quick switch over to, sorry about that.
Karen, I have it too if you need me to call.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay. Yeah, it looks good.
There we go. And I'm going to hand it off to Travis to talk a little bit more about our planning and monitoring.
Thanks, Karen. So I'll take the credit for Karen's issue with the slideshow there a little bit. I was late to the game to get her my copy of the slides. Just really, it's a symptom of the year that we're having. We are having a very significant fire season, and it's only March 12th, so, or 13th, sorry about that. So it just kind of lies the issue that a lot of us are having. We know that fire season was coming. We know the winter that we were having, but it is a time of year when we typically do a lot of planning and training and things like that. So for us, we got pretty compressed, and I'm running around busy as can be. And I was doing my version of the slides here late yesterday afternoon. So bear with us. We got the right one set up here. And thanks, Karen, again, for setting me up here discussing the fire behavior triangle. So my position as predictive services coordinator really involves decision support. I like to say I support decisions, I don't make them. So I'm taking elements of the fire environment triangle and interpreting them, making them more accessible or more easily understood using different techniques of graphics and data visualization and things like that, or other types of analytics for our fire managers. So they understand maybe, for instance, how many fire engines they may need for a given day over the weekend as they're trying to make their planning efforts. So that's my role in a nutshell. I support decisions, I don't make them. And there's a lot that goes into it. You can imagine weather is a very dynamic factor and is constantly changing. So there's some sayings about the weather. I won't get too far into them, but it's definitely something that keeps us on our toes. One of the main tools that we use that is actually formed on the basis of weather are fire danger systems. So in Minnesota, we use a combination of the National Fire Danger Rating System, NFDRS, and the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System, CFFDRS, and our decision support needs. We tend to like to have as much available to us as possible to base our decisions off of. And when I'm talking about decisions, one of the ones that you may be most familiar with is a smoky sign on the side of the road, the low, moderate, high, very high, extreme. That's kind of just scratching the surface, actually. That's a very simplified way of explaining fire danger, and there's quite a bit more that goes into it. And at the same time, it is a tool that we use to communicate to folks like you in the public generally what is happening. But fire danger is kind of relative. It's dependent on what you're trying to understand and what your values at risk are. If you just had a fire in the middle of nowhere, maybe not so dangerous for you unless you're considering the things like last year when we had a lot of wilderness fires up in Canada and we were seeing the impacts of air quality. So those fires were getting to be what would be called mega fires, up over 1 million acres, burning in some very heavy fuels, producing a lot of smoke. And we saw that last year for sure. One of the other big things that we look at, and one of the big things that drove the situation last year and is continuing into this year, is drought. And drought is driven by large-scale weather patterns. They develop relatively slowly. So you can imagine we've got things that are happening quickly. We've got things that are taking time. They're almost indiscernible if you look at them day to day, but if you look at them month to month or week to week, you start to see more changes in them. Fuels, on the other hand, change very slowly. Think like seasonal changes. The grass gets green, the leaves come out. That is far less dynamic, but it is still dynamic as opposed to those daily weather changes. And then the last part of the triangle, topography, changes very little over time. It's something that, as far as we're concerned, is static. There is obviously changes in topography, but not things that we need to watch necessarily from a predictive services standpoint. Topography is fairly predictable. And go ahead. So the other thing I want to mention too is this work is done in partnership with a lot of agencies, and I don't have them all on here. These are just some of the main ones that I put on. So a big one, like I mentioned, the Weather Service. The weather is the main driver, so it's not too much of a surprise that the Weather Service and NOAA are big partners for us in our decision support efforts. Additionally, we have a predictive services system set up that is tiered. So on the screen here, you'll see the National Interagency Coordination Group is how I wrote it. It's actually center. Again, I was kind of under the gun. So that is the NICC. And you can see the logo for that kind of down in the middle of the screen there. That coordinating Center consists of representatives from a lot of agencies. So the Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the National Park Service, the BLM, Bureau of Indian Affairs, National Association of State Foresters, which is a representation of all the state forestry agencies, which I'm a part of. And then again, NOAA, National Weather Service, Department of Defense, and the U.S. Fire Administration. Underneath that National Coordination Center, we have the Eastern Area Coordination Center, which consists of all wildfire agencies that fall within the states of Minnesota down to Missouri, over to West Virginia and up to Maine. So kind of that northeast corner of the U.S. And then below that, we have where I sit at the Minnesota Interagency Coordination Center. This is in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And I actually sit right next to our dispatch center where we have our aircraft dispatch and a few other dispatch functions that are housed in this building. Additionally, I have counterparts that work at the other agencies that are part of what is known as the Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact. So that consists of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ontario, and Manitoba. And then again, I mentioned the National Association of State Foresters. As an entity, they stand alone, and all of the states contribute to it. So it is kind of its own thing, but then they do represent states' interests up to those different coordinating centers as well. Go ahead. So I thought I'd give you guys a little preview of the things that I look at on a daily basis, and I look at a lot of data. I would say that I am in a perfect position, a perfect job for the interest that I have. I really like to understand how things work and take the data that I see and interpret it, analyze it, make decisions off of it, or help support decisions off of it, like I said. And one way to look at data is in a tabular form. So you're seeing a forecast that I pulled from the National Weather Service for Grand Rapids yesterday afternoon. And this has got a lot of information related to the weather, the things you might expect: temp, RH, dew point, wind. But we have some other things on there that are very specific to fire. The Haynes Index, the lightning activity level, ventilation rates, and things like that show up on these forecasts. Those are all information that we use on a daily basis to help understand what the weather is doing to the fire environment. Another way to look at our data is on a map, and the map on the right there is a 7-day total quantitative precipitation forecast. So I pulled this one yesterday afternoon again, and this is just showing over the next 7 days where the expected rain is likely to occur. And you can see we've kind of got a large portion of the state that's not expected to see any precipitation in the coming 7 days, which doesn't bode well for us in our spring fire season. We definitely like to see at least something show up. It's still possible that some of that storm systems that are tracking to the south could bump a little further north, but even still, a large portion of the state is likely to stay precipitation free over the next 7 days, which will only exacerbate the current conditions that we're seeing with our spring wildfire season. And I'll get a little bit more into some of the stats on where we stand compared to what would be considered normal here in a little bit. So another way to look at our decision support tools are on graphical displays like the one on the left here. So that graph is actually a representation of the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System index, the BUI, the Build-Up Index. It's one of the indexes that exists underneath the system. And this really talks about the long-term dryness and the potential for intensely burning fires. And last year, when you're looking at a graph like this, that black line that goes up and kind of intersects with the red lines, last year we were setting new records for this index at this station. When anytime you're looking at a graph like this and you've got a max and an average and a min, when your current trend lines are overlapping or near your max lines, you're definitely in a situation that's not normal. It's not that we haven't been here before, but we don't have it happen too often. So last summer was a pretty significant summer for us. Luckily, we did get just enough timely precipitation to keep our numbers down, but we were what I would call one step away from being in a very dire situation right through basically the entire summer. The map on the right is actually the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System Index, the Fine Fuel Moisture Code, the FFMC as we call it. And this is a representation of how dry those grasses and twigs and branches and things are on the landscape. I pulled this from the mapping system that we use yesterday afternoon, and you can see there's a lot of oranges and reds and yellows on the map. And just generally speaking, that means that the potential for fires to start was very high across the state yesterday. So moving on to some of those other factors I talked about, drought being a big one. You can see a lot of the U.S. is under some category of drought if you're looking at the map on the left there. Basically all of Minnesota, there's like 0.5%, I think, that managed to not make it in if you look at the stats associated with this map. But essentially the whole state is under at least abnormally dry conditions with over 50% that moderate drought currently. And I expect that that's going to continue to degrade as we get into some of those deeper drought categories. As we get further into the spring and the warmer months of the year, that drought will accelerate faster under any dry spells. So if we continue to stay dry, which we are expecting that's going to be the case, we're going to see drought development. That's what that map on the right shows there. From March through April, this product put out by the Drought Center is projecting that we will see drought expansion across basically the Canadian border from Idaho all the way over across to the lower peninsula of Michigan. And that's not good news when we're already sitting in fairly dire situation that we have this spring as far as an early start to our spring fire season. This is another tool that we look at. For us, really, we need to understand what's been happening in the months and potentially even years preceding where we are right now to help support our decisions. So this map is a modeled departure from normal snowpack. And normally this time of year, we'd still have some snow on the ground. And, anywhere from 4 to 8 inches would be typical across Minnesota. This map, actually, those darker reds that you're looking at the up into Isle Royale and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, those are deficits of 40 to 60 inches of snow. So we have had a very significant snow deficit over the lake states through this winter. And so we talk about fuels from the fire triangle, and fuels themselves are actually heavily influenced, especially for us in the spring, by the type of winter we have. So if you're looking at that picture on the left, you can imagine a heavy snowpack will compress all that grass down and lay it down flat like that, as opposed to the picture on the right where the fuels are all standing straight up. What this does is it allows a lot more oxygen to flow through that fuel bed. If a fire were to get started, the fire would be expected to burn with a lot more intensity and potentially spread faster and be harder to suppress in the picture on the right than on the left. It also allows the fuels to dry out faster. So we may get some rain and be back into fire weather the next day that allows for fuels like that to dry out quickly and to support starting and spreading. So I mentioned before, we have all these partners. We have the National Center, the geographic areas, and then my predictive services program here in Minnesota. And I communicate very frequently with folks from across the spectrum, all the way up to the national level. And what we're looking to do is to highlight areas of the country where we're seeing increased potential for significant wildfires. And through that coordination this year, we have a product that was put out by the National Interagency Coordination Center Predictive Services Unit, and it's showing, as you can see, increased potential for significant wildfires for basically the whole spring, so March, April, and May. These products go out for 3 months, so we haven't started talking about summer, but it's definitely on our mind. As we go ahead and move forward. As we look at our fire seasons, Karen mentioned them before, we have a very pronounced spring fire season where we have a lot of fires that occur. Typically, under a normal year, they're fires that will burn through grass. They're relatively easy to put out. That's kind of a quick flash in the pan, but we get a lot of them, and it keeps us busy running from place to place. Um, with our early start to the spring season and the dryness that we've had, we're seeing fire behavior being reported that's typical to April and May. So that definitely is concerning to see that happening already. On March 10th, we actually had 34 fires, which if you're looking at that graph again, when I told you if I put a trend line, this is an old graph, but if I put the trend line for this year, you'd see one of those new spikes occurring in that red for the time of year. So not the most fires that we've ever seen on any given day, but for that early in the year, that was very abnormal. And I just to kind of put this into perspective, I would say we're anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks earlier with the start to our spring fire season than we typically would be. So little numbers, I pulled these yesterday at about 4:47. It's very likely that we've had a few more fires reported since then. But as of that time, we had 191 fires from all the different agencies that work in the state, except for, and this is the big caveat, if you look kind of at that southwest part of the state, we don't have local fire department fires that they have the primary responsibility for, and that's generally the case down in the southwest. There's a lot more ag land down there. We don't have the big forested tracts. So our main wildfire response agencies are located kind of in that north metro all the way up through the northwest and the northeast part of the state. And then we do get some reports of fires that you see a few of those dots on the map. Those are typically when we have a fire on state land that gets reported to us. Otherwise, I would expect to see a lot more dots if we had that information. But with the information that we do have, that's where we stand. And to put that into perspective, if you go to the next slide, Karen, looking at that table, on average, we would have roughly 243 fires for the month of March. Well, we're almost there and we're not even through yet. And you can see the acres is about 5,125. So essentially, we're setting up to have a well above average March as far as the number and the acres burned. April and May, they're still looking like we could very easily see that significant numbers in the acres burned. There is the caveat, spring does have a lot of twists and turns when it comes to the weather, and I've been somewhat hopeful to see a pattern shift, and I haven't seen it yet. It's still possible. I mean, we could still have a month of wet and still actually have a significant portion of the fire season remaining. So the bar graph down there is just kind of accentuating when we have fires. So the lighter blue colors are the numbers of fires, and you can see that April and May have the highest peaks there with March behind it. And then the rest of the year we have fires, but not nearly to the extent that we do in March, April, and May. The darker blue are the acres burned, and you can really see the pattern, and this is what we call a bimodal fire season. So we get a lot of acres in the spring by nature of large grass fires that burn up large marshes and account for a lot of acres. Like I said, typically those types of fires are going to be more flash in the pan, as opposed to that bump that you see out there in August, September, and kind of into October. That's where we start to see our fires that are occurring in our timber fields. If you folks recall or hearing the news about the Greenwood fire from 2021, those are the types of fires that are putting those types of acres. So it's a situation where we don't have a lot of numbers. We're not running all over the place, chasing our tails, putting fires out, but the ones that we do get can be very significant. That's really where our most destructive fire potential does exist in that August, September, October time period. And if you're any type of a history buff, you'll know that we actually have a very strong history of very destructive fires, the Hinckleys, the Cloquets, and Budettes, and those types of fires in Minnesota, as well as the Lake States in general, with the Peshtigos and the Hurons fires from Michigan and Wisconsin. So with all that, one kind of word of good news is we've actually been seeing a downward trend in the number of fires from year to year, specifically since the late 2000s. And really, there's no mystery about it. That time period, the late 2000s, we implemented some very successful prevention programs, including our current burning permit program. And you can see it in the numbers. Our fires have been going down. On the other hand, our fire potential, or what might happen if a fire occurs in the wrong place at the wrong time, has not gone down. If anything, it's been going up. So that's where our prevention efforts are one thing. And we always want to keep in mind what may happen if we get one of those fires that reaches its full potential. And that's where leading into Karen and Mike's presentation. So I'll let them take it from there.
Thanks, Travis. So like Travis mentioned, a big part of fire is talking about prevention, because in Minnesota, over 90% of wildfires are caused by people. So we all can make a difference. Little changes in our behavior or our choices can make a big impact on the number of wildfires that we see. So Travis and his team are helping to, predict what is the potential that we're seeing this spring or in the fall. But what they can't do is predict how many wildfires we're going to see. And that's kind of what comes down to my role in wildfire prevention. So in Minnesota, the number one cause of wildfires are vegetative debris burning. So if you see the picture on this screen, that's an example. It's a large pile of vegetative debris. Might be brush, leaves, branches, logs, and anything over 3 feet high by 3 feet wide is really considered a vegetative debris burn pile. If you are, I might have that on the next slide, so I'll stop there. Not get ahead of myself. So that is the number one cause, and the causes do shift year to year, but generally debris burning is around 40% of all of our fire starts. And equipment is another one. In particular, last summer, we saw an increase in equipment-related fires in late summertime due to a lot of agricultural practices and the conditions that we were seeing on the ground. So those hot exhaust systems, metal on rock, were all, causing sparks or connecting with fuel and causing a wildfire to start. In Minnesota in particular, lightning, for example, is not as big of a concern. Yes, it can and does happen. It's about 2%. And campfires are also tend to be a lower percent. So it's really important to follow campfire safety. But again, it's not the major cause that we're looking at in wildfire causes in Minnesota in particular. So when we talk about vegetative debris burning, the photo here is a great example of vegetative debris burning. If we have 3 inches or more of continuous snow cover on the ground, that is a great time to do that burning. A burning permit is required any other time of the year. If there's not that snow cover on the ground, a burning permit is required. And some local jurisdictions, in particular in the southern or southwest part of the state, they may require a burning permit all year long. So it's important to check burning permit information, and you can get that on our website at mndnr.gov/burn permit. You can look up what counties and who to connect with about your burn permit. And in the spring, when we have this large number of wildfires happening, we have for a number of years now put spring burning restrictions into place. And that is trying to reduce the number of wildfires from the largest number or that largest cause of wildfires. And so burning permits are not activated during spring burning restrictions. And if you have a burning permit, you may have noticed we've already had 2 red flag warnings. So that's when fire weather conditions are critical, and that comes from the National Weather Service. So on days where we have red flag warnings or very high fire danger potential, then burning permits are also closed. And so you aren't able to activate your burning permit on days when conditions aren't safe to do so. That's one of the reasons it's great to get your burning permit and make sure you have that handy, because we're going to help let you know, yes, it's safe to burn, or no, please don't. You're not allowed to burn today. One of the issues with these large vegetative debris burns is that they can burn really deep into the organic layers of the soil, and they stay warm for days, sometimes even months. So those large burn piles, depending on where they're done and what kind of soil it is, they can actually rekindle and start a wildfire later. So most importantly, if you're doing large burns like that, make sure they're out cold. You want to drown it with water, stir, check for heat, drown with more water if you need to until it's really out cold. And anytime you're doing burning, stay close by. You want to be able to call 911 immediately if your fire does escape. So people, our wildland firefighters or the local fire department, can respond as soon as possible. But also keep a water shovel and your cell phone handy to stay safe. Campfire safety, like I said, it's not one of the biggest concerns that we have, but these can also be a cause for concern, especially on dry, windy days. And that's because embers from fires can actually be carried for over a mile. And oftentimes those embers being carried are the reasons that wildfires might start, or that your homes or property might be more in danger from embers traveling. So build your fire in a fire ring, clear the flammable material 5 feet around your fire ring. So you don't want those embers that are, kind of naturally coming up out of the campfire to connect with any fuel. And then keep it small. Our campfire should be 3 feet by 3 feet or smaller. And always stay by your fire. Don't let it keep burning while you go out for a hike or run for groceries or something else. You want to make sure that you're staying nearby and supervising the fire. And before you leave, again, make sure it's out cold as well, because those can also rekindle if the wind picks up. So we know our weather changes frequently in Minnesota. So make sure it's out cold before you leave. I mentioned last summer we had an issue with equipment, motor vehicles, in particular agriculture equipment at that time, but it's really important anytime we have dry conditions like we're seeing this year with those standing grasses, to make sure you maintain your equipment, ensure it has an approved spark arrestor. If you're out with your vehicle or you're taking your ATV out for a ride, park on gravel or pavement whenever possible. Those exhaust systems can reach like 2,000 degrees. Fire doesn't need that much heat to start a fire. So make sure you're not idling or parking in or near tall grasses whenever possible. If you're towing equipment, inspect your safety chains, confirm they're hooked properly, and they should be 3 to 5 inches above the ground. If you're out working, using a chainsaw, you're mowing, using something else that has maybe metal blades, check to the rear frequently to make sure you're not starting a fire. Look for those little plumes of smoke, and keep fire suppression tools and water nearby. The middle photo is an example of a fire that started last summer from a lawnmower. The rocks were hidden by the tall grasses. And you can see we had full green up. It wasn't super, super dry, but the fuels around the tall grasses were enough to start. Thankfully, he had a fire extinguisher in his truck as well as on the lawnmower, so that he was able to put that out and call for help right away from a safe location. And so again, ensuring you have good communication. Do you have cell reception? Do you have your phone handy? Because we want to be able to respond as soon as possible. And so thankfully too, we have our fire danger map and our burning restrictions map online. Those are updated frequently as conditions change. I pulled this from Monday, and this is where you don't need to be like Travis. You can come and look at the fire danger map. And this is kind of using all of that information that Travis and the Weather Service has all combined for us to provide information to the public. So go to mndnr.gov/burn restrictions, and you can see the current fire danger as well as any burning restrictions that are currently in place. Really important because wildfire danger is like a roller coaster, like the graphic says. It can go up and down. It changes very quickly. In Minnesota weather in particular, we could have a higher dew point in the morning where things are kind of moist, but by the afternoon the wind is picked up, the temperatures increase, and the fire danger is going to very high. So before you use any equipment or outdoor recreation, make sure you're checking that fire danger and burning restrictions map on our webpage. Hand it over to Mike to talk about how you can also prepare in case a wildfire is approaching.
Thank you, Karen. Again, I'm Mike Palmer. I'm a Central Region Firewise Specialist. So one thing I do is I work with landowners, property owners, and communities, so counties, townships, even towns or cities, to help give them resources and come up with plans and educational materials to reduce our risk of structure loss and damage, and mitigating that risk to our communities. So Firewise is a program in Minnesota that the DNR participates in. It's also a national program, and many other states and regions are participating. So, but it also is used as an adjective. So we can become Firewise. We can be Firewise as landowners and property owners. And we start that by just understanding our risk and what we can do to reduce that risk around our homes, our cabins, our properties, and also becoming involved in the community with our neighbors and our local and state government agencies. One thing about structure loss and structure damage is a lot of times that damage starts from embers. Karen alluded to that earlier. So we think of a wildfire moving across the landscape, and a lot of times it's the flame front that doesn't necessarily burn a structure down. That doesn't mean it can't, but it's those embers that fall into those receptive fuel beds in and around our structures. And we'll dive a little deeper into that in a minute, but fires, they start as surface fires. We can get into something we call ladder fuels. That's like the balsam trees and the little scrubby oak trees that we have on our properties, or the shrubs that are up against our house. Those are ladder fuels, and they can get into something we as firefighters call crown fires, which are fires that go up into the canopy of trees, typically in conifer situations. And those are incredibly hard to suppress, and they can be very damaging. And as a wildland firefighter, myself and our colleagues, that's kind of a hands-off situation. That's when you're going to start seeing lots of aircraft, and they're very hard to mitigate and suppress. So really, as community members and landowners, we want to do our part by reducing ladder fuels in and around our properties. And we do that by educating ourselves. And one way we can do that is start looking at home ignition zones. These are the areas around our homes and our properties where we can begin to do the work. And so in that immediate zone, that's that 0 to 5 feet. That's the stuff right by your house. Think the leaves and the pine needles that accumulate on our roofs and our gutters, or we have those decks and patios that are 3 feet or less above the ground. debris can accumulate under there, and those become receptive fuel beds for those embers and those sparks to catch. And then we get out into the intermediate zone, and a lot of times we have our firewood piles there. Those are huge areas where embers can catch and can cause structure loss. And the extended zone, we're thinking, what is the spacing between our trees? Are we reducing ladder fuels? And once we get beyond that, we're thinking access. As a wildland firefighter, one big thing that myself and my colleagues think about is defensible space around our houses. We want to be able to defend that home from a wildfire. And so we need good access first just to get there. So that 100-foot area is where we're thinking about making sure that a fire truck can get in and turn around and be able to leave. And this graphic that you see is a very popular one you'll see in all kinds of Firewise literature. The state has it on our website, and our partners also use this one a lot. So it's readily accessible. Please see if you can find it and start doing that work in those ignition. One thing that we offer here at the Minnesota DNR is the ability to get a Firewise homeowners kit. And so you can go on our website, you can sign up for it. It's super easy, and we'll send a packet out to you, which will include this home assessment that you can do yourself. It's very user friendly, and you can just walk around your house and your property and evaluate it, and you can score it, and you can just come up with, do I have a low risk, a moderate risk, a high risk, an extreme risk? And in that homeowners kit will be some other literature which will help guide you and give you ideas of how you can mitigate that risk. As when it comes to wildfires, we can never totally eliminate the risk, but we certainly can reduce it and we can mitigate it. And it all begins with the property owner and the homeowner. So I encourage everybody to sign up and get these home assessment kits. They are helpful, they don't take a lot of time, and they can really help you evaluate your property to decide what you should be doing to lessen the risk of structure damage and loss due to a wildfire. And then projects we can complete. So I always tell people, start small and go big, right? You can get overwhelmed with all this information and feel like, oh, I've got to do everything at once. We all lead busy lives. We understand that. But when it comes to mitigation, we have to start somewhere. So think of yard waste cleanup. Look at your decks. Look at your roofs. Look at your gutters. Keep those clean. Those places will catch embers if a wildfire starts and comes past your property. And those are going to be the places where structure damage and loss will begin. We can go into bigger picture, think of home hardening. We're replacing our roof. Maybe we want to get a metal roof. Make sure that you have those mesh screens in any kind of vents on your house. Usually it's 1/8 of an inch or less is sort of the standard for that. That's what we're thinking about keeping embers off. Clean under those decks and patios. Look at your soffits. Is there air getting in there? If there is, see if you can get those fixed and get those cleaned up. When it comes to landscaping, is it appropriate to use rock instead of mulch? Or if we're planting trees, look at fire resistant trees. Now, that's you're thinking more like your hardwood type trees, like your maples and your oaks versus balsam or your conifers and your pines, that kind of tree. And then keep things clean and prune them. Reduce those ladder fuels. So you want to remove those lower branches. Create clearance between crowns so you can't get a crown fire near your home. And then keep your grass green and maintained. Wildfires spread much slower across mowed grass than it does tall, dying grass. So start with those small things, keep your property clean. And then if you're going to move into the bigger picture, talk to your home builders and associations about what type of things are appropriate for that. Access is huge, like I alluded to earlier. As firefighters, we want to get in there to protect your home. Make sure you've got that visible 911 sign. We call them fire numbers, 911 signs. Across Minnesota, we often see those little blue signs with the number on there. That is your address. As firefighters, we look for that. And we don't want to miss it if you don't have one. We want to get in to suppress that wildfire. And then clearance, there is a standard. I think it's like 12 feet wide, 14 feet high. You know, you're thinking of those branches hanging over the driveway. But I tell people, can I drive a fire truck down your driveway, turn it around, and drive it out safely? That's what, as firefighters, that's what we're looking for. We want defensible space. And in order for us to do that, we as firefighters also have to be safe. And so it all starts with the landowner, improving that access and visibility, which goes into that turnaround. And then in getting involved in your community, you know, talk to your neighbors, maybe coordinate some of these efforts. If your fire departments are doing events, go to those events, get to know them. If you have a wildfire concern in your neighborhood, communicate that to your fire departments. They might want to know that, and that can help response and mitigation activities in your area. On a bigger level, you know, you can start getting involved with emergency managers and planners, and those people are going to develop something we call community wildfire protection plans, which we promote at the state. We get involved and help developing these. They can include being able to get grant money for like larger scale projects. Those are plans that really talk about what your community has for resources on hand, where is the wildfire risk in that community, whether it's a township or a county, et cetera. And then what are their needs going forward so that state agencies, county agencies, and federal agencies can help those communities out filling those needs. And then Firewise USA is a national program that I encourage people to look up. Maybe we have a link for that. If not, it's a simple Google search. And go onto that website, look at it, educate yourself, see if you part of a homeowners association. Do you have a township group that you're a part of? Maybe becoming a Firewise USA community is appropriate for you. It's all about education. It's all about risk mitigation. And as wildland firefighters and our local fire departments, you know, yeah, we're in the suppression world. We want to come put those fires out. We want to protect you. But it does really start with the landowner. And yeah, with that, that's what I have on Firewise, and I'll send it back to Karen. Thank you.
Yeah, like Mike was saying, you know, involving in your community or other neighbors can really make a big impact in the cost of some of those projects too. So if people are interested in reducing their wildfire risk, if you're working with your neighbors in your community, that can mean that you're sharing the cost of some of that. If you're doing some brush removal or using a chipper, those are events that a lot of our communities do across the state. And so encourage you to connect with your neighbors and work together. And as you saw from some of the slides that Travis shared, wildfire activity does happen everywhere. It's happening right now across the state of Minnesota, except for the very northern part, which still is, you know, experiencing some snow. And so it's really important to remember that you don't have to be living in the woods to have an impact from wildfire, even in the metro, especially the outer, you know, suburbs of the metro. We are lucky to have so much green space, but anywhere there's fuel, there is potential and risk. So a lot of things that people can do at home and while they're traveling up north or visiting family, choices that you can make and ways that you can prepare.
Well, thank you, Karen and Travis and Michael. We really appreciate you being here today and sharing all this great information and all you do to help keep us safe. Thank you for sharing your emails there. I assume you're welcome. If people have questions, they can contact you later, but we also have a little bit of a time to do some Q&A with anyone who would like to submit a question. You can put it in the Q&A and we can try to get to those. And then the chat has some really great links too, if you haven't noticed that yet. So please check that out. Again, this has been recorded, is going to be recorded, so we will have it available about probably early next week. You should be able to find it on mndnr.gov/discover or on the Minnesota DNR YouTube channel. So we have a really good question from Julia. She has an urban wooded lot, about a ½ acre, and she's been cutting, sawing fallen branches and twigs so they lay flat on the ground as possible, thinking that might reduce the fire hazard. Does that really help? It is not feasible for her to clear branches and twigs and dead leaves from this whole area, so she's wondering if there's other things she can do to minimize her fire hazard.
That seems like
maybe that's
kind of a
yours, huh?
Firewise wooey question. Yeah, you're doing the right thing. You're reducing fuel. That's good, and it's understandable. Like you can't go forever, right? So yeah, removing that fuel and then and maybe hauling it off somewhere is a good way to do it. I guess I beyond that, without knowing your exact situation, it's hard to say, but you're definitely doing the right thing.
Yeah, so cutting those, getting them flatter, laying close to the ground probably is going to help, sounds like.
It is, yeah, and then you don't want dead material to accumulate everywhere either. So if it is feasible to at least remove some of that, I would encourage you to do so. I don't know if burning is a possibility for you, but certainly there's haul sites hopefully in your community that you can reach out to.
When you talked
Yeah,
about
I know
community
that.
engagement, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I was just say the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, I think, does have a list of composting sites available. So in some areas, depending on where you are, it could be a potential for you to bring some of that to a composting site. Or like Mike mentioned, getting your burning permit, depending on what county you are in. Right now, probably not the best time to burn because of such high potential right now, but you could, pile some of that and have it ready for next winter or when conditions might change this summer.
Yeah, those composting sites, also known as yard waste sites. I know throughout the Twin Cities and the metro area, the counties manage those sites and work with some private facilities too. So definitely check in with your county or your city. And then you touched a little bit about working together with your neighbors or in the community to get some mulching done. And you can rent those mulchers for wood waste and even leaves and stuff at a pretty reasonable price for a few hours or whatever too. So that's a good option, I think, also. And then you got some great mulch to put on your plants and stuff. So we had another Firewise question. 1 second here. Will Firewise be granting funds to groups as they have in the past?
So we do Firewise Community Mitigation Grant in the state. So you would need to be part of a homeowners association or a county or a township that has a fiscal agent. So we don't grant funds out to just the individual landowner. We just don't have the ability to do that. So you would need to be part of some type of organization that is also either governmental or nonprofit.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Those are competitive grants, by the way, and they are limited funds, but you can find that on our website in the community page under Firewise.
Great. Rick is asking, this is a very specific question, but you might be able to answer it. If there are any predictions for the summer for the Fall Lake Township, Fernburg Road area near Ely, Minnesota, way up north, but maybe also just in general, kind of what we're looking at for that part of the state. You want to try that, Travis?
Sorry about that. I was muted. Yeah, so I can't really speak too specifically about down to the township level, but just generally knowing conditions that exist up in the Arrowhead. It is, how would I put this? It's like an accounting system, and we are well behind when it comes down to the precipitation that we would like to see. And if we continue to trend in this direction, the potential for those significant fires, the greenwoods, the pagamis, those types of fires, just continues to grow, especially if we carry that into the summer, which with already being behind, we'll need more than just a wet period. We'll really need a pronounced wet pattern to establish to completely reverse things, which is a little ironic because we were talking a lot about flooding last year, and we've got the opposite problem this year up in that part of the state.
Yeah, it's like the switch was turned on and then it was turned off, right? Climate change, I think, is a reality that we're going to see for I mean, is that the new reality? This climate, these pretty severe climate changes that we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes down to it. We've always had changing climate, and it has had the same effect you would expect on fire activity and fire potential. It just becomes a multiplier. So if we start having warmer than maybe what we would have experienced in the 90s or 2000s or even back in the 30s. That potential is still going to swing up, and it's just going to have maybe a higher ceiling as far as how high that potential can actually go.
Okay, thank you. Another question, a neighbor near me that regularly burns leaves, often without a permit. I've called the sheriff, but they just tell them to get a permit. They don't help educate. In fact, they had a big fish fire a night ago. Any ideas to deal with that?
That's a tough one because I feel like you are doing the right thing. If you are noticing someone that's burning a fire larger than 3 feet by 3 feet, you can connect with your local jurisdiction. Now, depending on what county you are in, I encourage you to go to our burn permit webpage that should be linked in the chat. And you can look up your county and who in particular in that county is managing burn permits. That could be another route. It depends on your specific county. In some areas, it could be the forestry office. So there might be able to be some ways to work with a forest officer in helping to educate on why they should have a permit. And it's important to know too. I think it's hard because we can control what we do, and that's what I encourage you to do is to make the best choices for you. But we can't always control what other people do. But that. Right, if they have a fire, that could definitely impact you and your property as well. So as best we can to educate and help people understand the importance of that, especially in a year like this when it is such high potential, is important. And they could be or should be liable to get a fine if they don't have a permit and one is required. And if a wildfire starts, people can be responsible for the costs of wildfire suppression, and those are very costly. So hopefully that could be, some information used to help educate them as well.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Megan is wondering if there's any movement in Minnesota to begin incorporating controlled burns into the state fire management plan for public land, ? And for working with tribes. Also, are there ever times that private landowners are allowed to explore this route?
I can speak a little bit to that. We actually have a fairly robust prescribed burn program. The Division of Wildlife actually is the leader in the state actually as far as prescribed burns for DNR. We also have our Eco Waters and Parks and Trails. Forestry does some prescribed burning, not nearly to the extent that the other divisions do. So it is in place. Prescribed burns in general, even on a national scale, are kind of a big topic because there's a lot of emphasis to increase prescribed burning, which is good. There are a lot of benefits to good fire. And at the same time, we need to manage and mitigate any risks that come about from putting fire on the landscape because you can't ever take it quite down to zero. But in general, prescribed burning is actually a very safe and effective practice. I think there was a second part to the question. Maybe.
Well, I think are there resources for landowners that want to either maybe potentially get trained to do it themselves or other folks that they can, connect with and to have those burns done?
There are some nonprofit, or not, I should say nonprofit, for-profit companies that will do land management activities, including prescribed burning on contracts. It is possible for landowners to complete prescribed burns themselves. That does come with some caveats there, and you're on the right track by asking about training. I don't have anything to share right in front of me, but there are resources out there. A lot of different universities and fire science consortiums and things do put out a lot of information. I just don't have them on hand right now to hand to you.
And your local fire department potentially might know some of those groups, I imagine.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
Depending on where you are within the state. I mean, I would say there's probably a heavier concentration in the North Metro area of those companies.
And we have as you mentioned, we have wildlife offices and wildlife programs across state, area wildlife offices, and every part of the state is covered by some area wildlife manager, and they would be a great resource too if you haven't connected with the local DNR area wildlife office to find some resources and connections with folks that do that work. Well, we are out of time. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all the questions. You had your email up there. Hopefully folks can connect with us if they have other questions. But thanks everyone for joining us today. Really great information, really challenging weather we have right now. So be careful out there, and join us again next week. We are going to have a program on the National Archery in the Schools program that many of our schools are engaged in, but we'll provide resources and other information on how you can get engaged if your school isn't, or your students programs and something your student wants to get into. We have a lot of great resources, and we'll be talking about that next week. So join us at mndnr.gov/discover and see the link of all the new programs we have this spring. So thanks again for all Karen and Travis and Michael for joining us today. Have a great day.